Donovan James hadn't smiled in 2 years, not since the day his divorce papers arrived with his ex-wife's lipstick still smudged on the signature line. He sat alone at a booth in the back corner of a small diner off Highway 6, where the fluorescent lights buzzed softly above, and the coffee tasted like burnt regret. The place was nothing special: vinyl booths, laminated menus, and the faint scent of fried onions lingering in the air. But he came here every Thursday at exactly 8 p.m., like clockwork. Same booth, same black coffee, same silence. That night, she walked in. "Sorry for the wait," came a voice that didn't match the dull surroundings. It was bright,
Warm. Real.
"What can I get you tonight?" He looked up, not expecting anything. And for the first time in 2 years, he forgot how to breathe. She had a smile that didn't try too hard, like she didn't even know she had it. But it hit him hard. Her dark hair was pulled into a messy ponytail, a few strands clinging to her cheek. Her name tag read Mara. Her eyes were the kind of brown that made you forget everything cold. "I'll take the usual," he said, trying to sound unaffected. She gave a small laugh. "You've never ordered anything but coffee." His lips twitched. That was dangerously close to a smile. "I'm feeling adventurous." She scribbled something on her pad, nodding. "All right, rebel. Pancakes and black coffee. Coming up." He watched her walk away, something heavy shifting in his chest. Donovan was a millionaire. Not the loud, flashy kind. He didn't wear designer logos or throw his money around. But he owned 3 boutique hotels in Austin, 2 more in Denver, and a luxury property under construction in Miami. He drove a sleek black Aston Martin, lived in a penthouse with floor-to-ceiling windows, and had a wine fridge more expensive than most people's rent. None of it mattered. Not since his ex-wife had used him like a stepping stone to climb into the arms of a richer man.
So he'd made a vow.
No love.
No relationships. No risks.
But that smile? It cracked something in him. The next week he came back. And the week after that. And the week after that. Mara always worked the Thursday night shift. She always wore her hair tied up, always remembered his order, always had something sarcastic to say when he tried to act mysterious. "You're not fooling anyone, you know," she said one night, pouring his coffee. "You sit back here pretending to be all brooding and mysterious, but you're just a guy who likes pancakes too much." He raised an eyebrow. "You think you've got me figured out?" She leaned on the edge of the booth, her eyes twinkling.
No.
"But I think you want someone to." That was the first time he laughed out loud in years. One night, after a particularly long day dealing with contractors and investment meetings, he came in late. She was wiping down tables, half her hair falling from its ponytail. "You look like hell," she said, sliding into the booth across from him without asking. "I feel worse," he admitted. "Want to talk about it?" He paused. No one had asked him that in a long time. People usually wanted to talk about his money, his properties, his next business move. Not him. "I lost a deal today. The Miami project. It's falling through." She didn't say anything. Just sat there, quiet. Present. And that was the moment he realized he wanted to tell her everything. Over the next few weeks, he did. He told her about the ex-wife, about the betrayal, about how he'd built a life so big that no one could ever hurt him again. And Mara? She didn't pity him. She didn't try to fix it. She just listened. Teased him when he got too serious. Called him out when he tried to dodge feelings. One night, after the diner closed, they sat out back on an old metal bench under the stars. She was sipping a soda, her legs swinging. "Why do you come here?" she asked, not looking at him. "Because you're here." She looked over, surprised. "I told myself I'd never fall in love again," he added quietly. "But then you smiled." Mara stared at him, eyes wide. "That's not fair." "What isn't?" "You can't say things like that and expect me not to fall for it." He reached out, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Then don't fight it." Their kiss was soft. hesitant, like they were both afraid of what it meant. But neither of them pulled away. The next morning, Donovan stood in front of the mirror in his penthouse bathroom, staring at his reflection like he didn't recognize the man anymore. He looked lighter.
Alive.
He hadn't felt that way in years. Later that day, he showed up at the diner with a white box wrapped in gold ribbon. "What is this?" Mara asked, brow raised. "Open it," he said, setting it on the counter. Inside was a pair of red leather heels, elegant, expensive, and completely unlike the sneakers she wore every night. "I don't do fancy," she said, eyeing him. "You will tonight." He took her to a rooftop restaurant overlooking the city. The hostess knew his name. The wine was poured before they sat. A string quartet played in the corner. Mara looked around, stunned. "This is insane," she whispered as they were seated. "You deserve insane," he said simply.
She didn't argue.
That night, as they danced under fairy lights and the skyline glittered around them, Donovan realized he was in trouble. Because he wasn't just falling, he had already fallen. And for once, he didn't want to stop. But love doesn't come without fear. And Donovan had been burned before. So when he dropped Mara off at her apartment, kissed her goodnight, and watched her walk inside, a voice in the back of his head whispered something he didn't want to hear. "Don't ruin this." But it was already too late. He was in love with a waitress who smiled at him like he wasn't broken. Mara hadn't planned to see Donovan again after that rooftop dinner. Not because she didn't want to, but because she did. Too much. She'd spent most of her life learning how to survive, not how to feel safe. Her mom had vanished before her 10th birthday, and her dad had never figured out how to be anything but angry. Love wasn't something she believed in, it was something other people got. People with trust funds and clean family portraits. Not girls who worked double shifts and fell asleep with tomorrow's to-do list still buzzing in their heads. But when Donovan touched her hand across that candlelit table, when he looked at her like she was the only person in the world worth listening to, she felt something she didn't have a name for. So naturally she panicked. The next morning, she called in sick. Then she picked up a few extra shifts on Mondays and Wednesdays, hoping he wouldn't show up on any other day but Thursdays. He didn't. And that somehow made it worse. Because it meant he noticed the pattern and he respected it. He was giving her space. Which meant he cared. 3 Thursdays later, Mara stepped out the back door of the diner during her break and found him leaning against a black car that definitely didn't belong in their cracked alley. He wasn't dressed like a millionaire, just jeans and a fitted navy shirt, but he still looked like he could buy the whole block without blinking. "I was starting to think you skipped town," he said, pushing away from the car. "I thought about it," Mara replied, crossing her arms. "But I like the hash browns too much." He studied her, eyes unreadable. "You okay?"
Yeah.
"Just needed a little breathing room." "I can give you that," he said. "I just won't pretend I didn't miss you." Her heart skidded, and she looked away. "This is the part where I say something sarcastic to deflect, right?" "You can try," he said, stepping closer, "but I think we're past that." She didn't pull away when he reached for her hand this time. And when he laced their fingers together, like it was the most natural thing in the world, neither of them said a word. That night, she let him walk her home. And the next Thursday, he picked her up after her shift ended instead of waiting for her to change in the back and walk out into the dark alone. This time, he didn't take her to a rooftop or a restaurant. He drove her to a quiet hilltop just past the city line, where a blanket was already laid out and a basket waited beside it. "You packed a picnic?" she asked, eyeing it. "I had help," he admitted. "I can't cook. At all."
"I'm shocked."
"Don't be. I once burned oatmeal." She laughed, a real one that slipped past her defenses like sunlight through blinds. They sat under the stars, eating cold pasta salad and drinking sparkling water from glass bottles that probably cost more than her rent. Between bites, he asked questions. Real ones. About her favorite books, the cities she'd never seen, The job she'd dreamed of before life forced her to take the one she had. "I used to want to be a photographer," she said, resting her head against the rolled-up sweatshirt he'd stuffed behind her for comfort. "Not weddings or portraits. I wanted to travel. National Geographic style." "Why didn't you?" "My dad got sick. Bills piled up. I sold my camera. The rest is pretty predictable." Donovan didn't say anything right away. He just looked at her like he was memorizing the details of her face. "I could get you a new one," he said eventually. She turned sharply. "Don't. I didn't mean it like." "I know," she cut in. "But I need to do some things for myself. If I ever pick up a camera again, I want it to be because I earned it, not because someone handed it to me with a bow." There was no judgment in his eyes. Just something that looked dangerously close to admiration.
"I get that," he said.
"More than you probably realize." Later that week, Donovan sat in a boardroom with 3 real estate investors and barely heard a word they said. His assistant had to nudge him twice during the meeting. "You look like you're somewhere else entirely," she said afterward. "I am," he muttered. That night, he drove past the diner but didn't stop. Instead, he parked a few blocks away and walked the neighborhood. The streets were cracked, the streetlights buzzed faintly overhead, and the only open businesses were a 24-hour laundromat and a pawn shop. He didn't like the idea of her walking these streets alone after midnight. Didn't like that she had to. The next morning, he made a call. By the following week, a brand new security light had been installed behind the diner. The alley was cleaned. The owner, a wiry man named Gino, suddenly had enough funding to repair the broken front sign and upgrade the register system. He never asked who sent the money. Donovan didn't tell Mara. He wasn't trying to win her. He just wanted her safe. 2 Saturdays later, Mara showed up at his penthouse for the first time. She stood just inside the doorway, wide-eyed but pretending not to be. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a sweeping view of the skyline, and the open-concept living space looked like something out of a magazine. "Okay, I'll admit it," she said, slipping off her shoes. "You're definitely not faking the millionaire thing." "I thought I should stop by the bank and make sure the money was still there," he teased. "You keep saying things like that, and I'm going to start checking the walls for secret safes." "Only the one behind the bookshelf," he deadpanned. She raised an eyebrow. "Kidding," he added quickly. They spent the afternoon sprawled across his massive sectional, eating takeout straight from the containers and watching old adventure films. At one point, she fell asleep with her head on his chest, her hand curled under her chin like she'd finally stopped keeping watch. He didn't move the entire time. But the day after that, everything shifted. Mara was walking to the train station when her phone buzzed. Her landlord, who never called unless the rent was late, left a voicemail. Her building had been sold. The new owner was raising the rent by 30%. She stared at the screen, heart sinking. She didn't want to ask Donovan for help. She couldn't, so she did what she always did. She shut down. That night, she didn't answer his call. The next night, she canceled their plans. By the third night, he showed up at the diner, only to be told she'd switched to the morning shift. When he found her the following afternoon, she was sitting on the curb outside the laundromat, her knees drawn up, a to-go coffee cooling beside her. "You disappeared," he said, crouching beside her. "I can't take this," she said without looking at him. "The dinners. The gifts.
You.
It's too much. Mara, I'm about to lose my apartment. I can't afford to keep pretending I belong in your world." He sat beside her, elbows resting on his knees. "Who says you have to belong anywhere but with me?" She didn't answer. Her silence was louder than any words. He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a slim black envelope, and held it out. "I'm not giving you money," he said. "Just look." She hesitated, then took it. Inside was a lease agreement. Her name was printed clearly at the top. The address was in a quiet, safe area just north of the city. The rent was listed as affordable. Far too affordable for what the neighborhood usually cost. I bought the building, he said simply. Lowered the rent on every unit. You're not the only one struggling. She stared at him, speechless. I didn't do it to impress you, he added. I did it because I can. And because I want you to feel like you can breathe. Tears filled her eyes before she could stop them. I don't know how to need someone, she whispered. You don't have to, he said. Just let me stand beside you. She leaned into him, the weight of her walls finally cracking. And for the first time in her life, she didn't feel like she was falling. She felt like she was being caught. Mara sat at the edge of the low-rise balcony of her new apartment, watching the city lights blink to life as dusk settled. The new place was quiet. Too quiet. No neighbors yelling through paper-thin walls, no radiator clicking in protest, no distant sirens weaving through her sleep.
Just stillness.
She felt like she didn't deserve it. A knock at the door broke the silence. She opened it to find Donovan leaning casually against the frame, sleeves rolled to his elbows, hair slightly mussed like he'd run his hands through it more than once on the drive over. I was in the area, he said, holding up a brown paper bag that gave off the unmistakable scent of garlic and butter. Thought you might be hungry. I already ate, she replied, folding her arms. Then I guess I'll eat twice. She stepped aside, and he walked into the modest apartment, glancing around the living room with its second-hand couch and a thrift store coffee table. He didn't comment on any of it. Instead, he set the food down and pulled 2 plates from the cabinet without asking. How do you keep doing that? She said, watching him. Doing what? Walking in here like you've always belonged. He paused, then set the plates down with a quiet clink. Because I want to. They ate on the floor, cross-legged, knees bumping occasionally. Mara picked at her pasta, the weight of a question pressing against her ribs. Why did you really buy the building? She asked. I told you. No, she said, lifting her gaze. The real reason. He leaned back on one arm, eyes steady. Because I've spent years building things that make money. Hotels, condos, restaurants. But none of them made me feel like I was doing something that mattered until I saw your name on that lease. She didn't answer. She wasn't sure she could. Donovan stood and wandered toward the window. There's something I've been working on. It's not public yet. Mara tilted her head. What, another hotel?
No.
A foundation. He turned, hands in his pockets. For women who want to start careers in the arts, but can't afford the training or the tools. Grants, mentorships, workshops. I want to call it the Ember Project, after my mother. She blinked. You've never mentioned her. She died when I was 21. She was a painter. Never sold a single piece. But she lit up every time she picked up a brush. Mara stood slowly. Why are you telling me this now? Because you matter, Mara. And I'm tired of pretending you don't. Her throat tightened. You barely know me. I know enough. He stepped closer. I know you walk fast when you're nervous. That you hate the sound of ticking clocks. That you make jokes when you're scared, and that you look away when someone tries to see the real you. She drew in a shaky breath. I'm not asking you to fix me, he added. I just want to be the man who stands beside you while you figure out what comes next. The silence between them pulsed with something fragile but real. She reached for his hand without thinking. It felt like choosing something that scared her and doing it anyway. The next week, Mara entered a contest for aspiring photographers. She didn't tell anyone. Not Donovan. Not her coworkers. Just printed 5 of her favorite shots, gritty, real images of the diner, the alley, the quiet strength of the people she'd served, and mailed them off with a trembling hand. She didn't expect to hear back. But 2 weeks later, an envelope arrived. Inside was a letter. She'd won a finalist spot, an exhibition slot at a local gallery. Her work would be displayed. She stood in the middle of her tiny kitchen, staring at the letter as her chest rose and fell like she'd been running uphill. Donovan picked up on the first ring. "You're coming to the gallery opening," she said. "But you're not allowed to say anything cheesy like, 'I always knew you could do it.'" I was going to say about time, but that works too. The night of the opening, Mara wore a sleeveless black jumpsuit she'd borrowed from her neighbor. Her hair was down, curled at the ends like she wasn't pretending she didn't care anymore. When she stepped out of her building, Donovan was waiting beside the car. Not the Aston Martin this time.
Aslek, under stetshetssedan.
"You look like trouble," he said with a glint in his eye. She lifted an eyebrow. "You clean up all right yourself." They arrived at the gallery just as the crowd began to buzz. The space was filled with warm lighting, soft music, and clinking glasses. Her photos lined one side of the room, printed large and mounted against stark white walls. Donovan watched her from across the space as guests approached her, asked questions, offered compliments. She answered with grace, her voice steady, her eyes brighter than he'd ever seen them. When she finally reached his side, he handed her a glass of sparkling water. "You belong here. I still feel like someone's going to tell me I'm in the wrong place. Then I'll just have to buy the gallery and make it the right one." She laughed, but there was a tremble in it. "I don't want you to buy things for me." "I know," he said. "That's why I haven't." She blinked.
What?
"I didn't fund this gallery. Or the contest. Or the judges.
This is all you, Mara.
Every piece of it." Tears stung her eyes, but she blinked them back. "You're really bad at being the cold, unreachable guy, you know that? Don't tell anyone. It'll ruin my brand." That night, they walked the long way back to the car. He stopped halfway through the parking lot, reached into his coat, and pulled out a small velvet box. Mara froze. "Don't panic," he said quickly. "It's not what you think." He opened the box to reveal a delicate silver necklace. Hanging from the chain was a tiny camera charm, no larger than her thumbnail. "It's just a reminder," he said, "that you're not standing still anymore." She took the box, fingers trembling. "You still scare me." "I scare myself," he said softly. "But that doesn't mean we stop." She leaned into his chest, the necklace clutched in her hand. Later that week, Mara's photo exhibit was featured in a local arts column. Her inbox flooded with inquiries. A nonprofit reached out about a documentary project. A journalist offered to feature her in a piece on photographers from working-class backgrounds. She read every message twice, then stared at the ceiling until 3 a.m. Donovan entered her apartment the next day to find her pacing, barefoot, hair in a messy braid. "I think I'm supposed to say yes to something," she said. "But I don't know what I'm doing." "Then say yes anyway," he said. "Figure it out on the way. I've never had the freedom to just try something. You do now." She looked at him, her voice barely above a whisper. "You changed everything."
"No," he said.
"You did. I just had the front row seat." The next afternoon, Donovan stood in the middle of a rooftop space he hadn't used since before the divorce. It had once been his escape, the only place he could think. But for the last 2 years, it had sat empty. Dusty. Forgotten. He called in a design team. Within 48 hours, the rooftop transformed into something else entirely. Twinkling lights strung above. A long table set for 2. A string quartet tuning quietly in a corner. Mara arrived just after sunset. She stepped out of the elevator, her breath catching. "What is this?" she asked.
"Just dinner," he said.
But maybe not just dinner. He led her to the table, pulled out her chair. They talked, laughed, shared bites from the same plate. And as the sky deepened to indigo, he stood. "I told myself I'd never do this again," he said. "That love was too dangerous. That it took more than it gave." She rose slowly, her eyes locked on his. "But then you smiled," he said. "And I broke every promise I made to myself." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a ring. It was simple, elegant. A single diamond set in a thin, platinum band. I don't need a perfect life, he said. I just need one where I get to wake up next to you. Mara stared at him, her heart pounding so loudly she couldn't hear the music anymore. I'm not asking for easy, he said. I'm asking for real. She stepped forward, tears in her lashes, and nodded. Yes, she whispered.
God, yes.
He slid the ring onto her finger, and the city stretched out around them, glittering like the future they were about to build together. The morning after Donovan proposed, Mara woke to the sound of soft rain tapping against the windows of his penthouse. The city outside was blurred in mist, and the world felt suspended, like it was holding its breath. She sat up slowly, the ring on her finger catching the light. It felt both impossibly delicate and impossibly solid, like something that had always been waiting for her. She padded barefoot into the kitchen where Donovan was already at the stove in a crisp dress shirt, sleeves rolled halfway up, flipping something on a skillet like he did it every day. I didn't know you cooked, she said, leaning against the doorway. I don't, he said without turning. But I'm trying to learn. For you. She stepped closer, peered into the pan. Those are definitely going to burn. He laughed, and she stole a piece of toast from the counter, biting into it as he turned off the stove and set the eggs aside. I have a meeting this afternoon, he said. But I want to take you somewhere first. Her brows lifted. At 9 in the morning? It's important. By 10, they were driving north, away from the city. The rain slowed to a drizzle, and the clouds began to lift. Mara stared out the window, her hand resting on his thigh, the quiet hum of the car between them. She didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. They pulled into a gravel lot beside an old brick schoolhouse. The windows were boarded, and ivy had begun creeping up the side. A rusted chain hung loosely across the front gate. Mara stepped out, wary. This is where you're taking me? He nodded, unlocking the gate with a key he pulled from his coat pocket. Come inside. The interior was dusty and dim, but the bones of the building were beautiful. High ceilings, arched windows, wood beams that had weathered time. I bought it last month, he said, his voice echoing slightly in the open space. I've been trying to find the right use for it. She turned to him slowly. What kind of use? I want to turn it into an art center. Studios. Workshops. A gallery space. He walked farther in, gesturing to the light-filled back room. And this could be a photography lab. For students who've never touched a real camera. Mara stood frozen. Why are you telling me this? Because I want you to run it. Her breath caught. Donovan, I'm not handing you a gift. I'm offering you a chance. Something you'll build. Something that's yours. She took a slow step forward, her fingers brushing the edge of a long-forgotten chalkboard. I wouldn't even know where to begin. You'll figure it out, he said. You always do. That night, she lay awake in his bed, staring at the ceiling, the possibilities spinning through her mind like stars. She'd spent so long surviving that she didn't know what it meant to imagine a future that stretched more than a week ahead.
But now, she saw it.
Not just the center, but the life they were building around it. A life with real roots. Over the following weeks, Mara threw herself into the project. She met with architects, reviewed floor plans, toured community centers across the city. Donovan stayed involved, but he gave her space to lead. He never hovered, never second-guessed her decisions. He trusted her completely, and she felt it in every look, every silent nod from across a room. One morning, she found herself standing in what would become the gallery wing, sunlight pouring through the freshly unboarded windows. The construction team had knocked down the old partitions, revealing the full arc of the original ceiling. She pressed a hand to her chest, overwhelmed. Donovan arrived minutes later, his tie crooked, clearly on his way to a meeting. You all right? He asked. She turned to him, eyes wet. I think this is the first time I've ever felt proud of something I'm building. Not surviving. Not making it through. But creating something that didn't exist before. He stepped forward, brushing his thumb gently across her cheek. This is only the beginning. That evening, they attended a gala for one of Donovan's hotel charities. Mara wore a sleek black dress that stopped just above the ankle, and her hair was twisted into a low knot. Donovan had arranged for a stylist, but she'd insisted on doing everything herself, wanting to feel like she belonged in her own skin. As they entered the ballroom, heads turned. Donovan's world was filled with polished people investors, developers, socialites, but he kept her close, his hand never leaving her waist. She leaned in at one point, whispering, "Are they all staring because I'm new, or because I'm clearly not one of them?" "Neither," he murmured. "They're staring because you're the only real thing in the room." She didn't respond to that. She couldn't. Later that night, as they danced under the chandelier, Mara let her head rest against his shoulder. His breath was warm against her temple. "You never told me what made you change your mind," she said quietly. "About love." He was silent for a few beats, then pulled back just enough to meet her gaze. "I used to think love was dangerous because it made you vulnerable. But I was wrong. The real danger is living without it. Going through life untouched. Unmoved. I saw you, and for the first time, I wanted to be changed." She swallowed hard, her throat tight. "You did." Spring arrived in slow, sweet waves. The center's renovations moved quickly. Mara hired staff, designed logos, created outreach programs. Donovan's foundation funded the initial phase, but by the time the center opened, it had already secured 3 independent grants. On the day of the grand opening, the sun was high and skies were clear. A crowd gathered outside the newly painted building, now named the Ember Center in honor of Donovan's mother. Mara stood at the podium, her voice steady as she welcomed the guests. "I used to think there was only one kind of strength," she said. "The kind that keeps you standing when everything else falls apart. But I've learned that building something, dreaming, risking, trusting that strength too." Donovan stood beside her, his hand in hers, pride written across every line of his face. After the ribbon was cut, they walked through the doors together, the center filled with light and life. Children explored the art rooms. Local artists set up their work in the gallery. Volunteers passed out brochures. It wasn't just a building. It was a beginning. That evening, back at the penthouse, Mara stepped onto the balcony and looked out over the city. Donovan followed, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "I can't believe this is my life," she said. "It's ours," he corrected. She turned, her fingers playing with the edge of his collar. "What happens next?" He kissed her gently, the kind of kiss that didn't rush or ask it promised.
"Whatever we want," he said.
3 months later, they stood in front of a small circle of family and friends at a private villa just outside Florence. There was no fanfare, no press, just sunlight, music, and vows that came from the rawest parts of themselves. Mara wore a dress simple and elegant, her hair down, wild curls pinned with tiny white blossoms. Donovan, in a tailored navy suit, looked at her like every wall he'd ever built had finally come down. "I vow to never run from love again," he said, voice low but unwavering. "Because you showed me that love isn't weakness. It's the strength to stand still and let someone see you." Tears slid silently down her cheeks as she replied, "I never believed in forever. But then you looked at me like I wasn't broken, like I was something worth finding. And now I believe in everything." They kissed beneath the Italian sky, and the world narrowed to one undeniable truth. He had vowed to avoid love, but the moment she smiled, she'd rewritten everything. And this time, he wasn't afraid to stay. The late summer air in Florence was warm and golden, filtering through the open shutters of the villa as Mara stirred awake. Her bare feet touched the cool marble floor, grounding her in a reality that still felt like a dream. She crossed to the balcony without waking Donovan, who lay tangled in white sheets, his hand resting over the pillow she'd just vacated. The vineyards below rolled like soft waves, stretching toward the horizon where the sun hovered, casting a mellow light over everything. She wrapped her arms around herself and breathed in the scent of lavender and citrus from the garden below. It was quiet. Not the kind of quiet that felt lonely, but the kind that made her believe she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Behind her, the sheets rustled. "You disappeared," Donovan said, his voice husky from sleep. "I needed to see if any of this was real," she replied without turning. He stepped up behind her, shirtless, the warmth of him settling against her back as his arms wrapped around her waist. "Is it?" She leaned into him. "It is now." Later that week, they returned to Austin. The center was thriving, and the buzz from its opening hadn't slowed. Local newspapers praised its community programs, and the waiting list for photography workshops had tripled. Mara threw herself into the day-to-day, not out of obligation, but because she loved it. She was building something meaningful, and for the first time, her past wasn't chasing her, it was fueling her. Donovan's schedule was no less intense. His Miami property had survived the earlier fallout and was now nearing completion. He began considering projects in Chicago and Vancouver, but he didn't make a move without talking it through with her first. Not because he needed permission, but because he wanted her voice in his future. One evening, she found him in his home office, the blueprints for a new hotel spread across the glass desk. She leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "You ever think about slowing down?" He looked up, surprised by the question. "You mean retire early and live on a vineyard?" "I mean letting yourself stay in one place long enough to breathe." He set the pencil down. "I've never had a reason to." "You do now." He stood slowly, walked over to her and cupped her face in his hands. "If you asked me to drop everything tomorrow, I would." She shook her head. "I don't want you to stop being who you are. I just want to know you're not running anymore." He kissed her forehead. "I'm not. Not since you." That weekend, they hosted a small gathering at the center, a fundraiser to support scholarships for students who couldn't afford equipment. Donovan didn't take the spotlight, didn't announce his contributions. He stood in the back, watched her speak to the crowd with a quiet pride that never left his eyes. After the guests had gone, and the staff had finished cleaning, Mara sat alone in the gallery. The lights were dimmed, her photos still hanging along the far wall, the first ones she'd ever trusted the world to see. Donovan entered silently and sat beside her. "I met your father once," he said. Her head turned sharply. "What?" 2 weeks before the opening, he showed up at the diner. Said he wanted to see you, but didn't know how. She was quiet for a long time. "He hasn't called." "Not once." He said he was scared. She laughed once, bitterly. "That sounds about right. He told me he always thought you'd break, but you didn't. You bent, but you never broke." "He didn't know me," she whispered. "Not really." Donovan reached into his jacket and pulled out a small envelope. "He left this. Said it was yours." She hesitated, then took it. Inside was a faded photograph of her at age 7, holding a plastic camera, beaming. On the back, scribbled in uneven handwriting, "I was wrong, and I'm sorry." Mara stared at the photograph, her chest tight. "I don't know what to do with this." "You don't have to do anything," Donovan said. "Just feel whatever you feel." She leaned against him, the photo still in her hand. "I don't want to carry him with me. Not into this part of my life." "Then don't," he said. "But let it be a reminder of what you overcame, not who he was." In the weeks that followed, life didn't slow down, but it settled. Donovan's Miami hotel launched to success, and he turned down the Vancouver project in favor of staying closer to home. He bought a historic townhouse near the center, one they could renovate together. Mara moved in gradually, her things appearing one at a time until it was undeniable that she lived there. Nothing was rushed. Nothing was forced. One evening, she came home to find the entire dining room covered in canvas drop cloths. Donovan stood in the middle, a paint roller in one hand and a sheepish grin on his face. "I thought I'd surprise you." She surveyed the half-painted wall. "Is that supposed to be sage green? Because it looks like guacamole." He looked at the roller. It said forest mist. It lied. She burst out laughing, and he joined her, smearing paint on his shirt in the process. They painted the rest of the room together, music playing softly in the background, their clothes splattered and their hands sticky. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. One night, Mara stood in front of the mirror, brushing her hair, when Donovan leaned against the bathroom doorway, arms folded. "I canceled the board meeting in Chicago," he said. She met his eyes in the mirror. "Why?" "Because we have the appointment with the adoption agency next week." She froze, the brush slowing in her hand. "You're really ready?" "I've never been more ready for anything in my life." They talked about it quietly, late at night, under blankets and stars. Mara had always wanted a family, but hadn't been sure she could be one. Donovan had admitted he'd never thought about it until her. They didn't rush the process. They met with counselors, attended workshops, and filled out every form themselves. When the time came, they met a boy named Eli. He was 6, cautious, and had eyes that watched everything with the kind of silence Mara recognized too well. The first time he stepped into their home, he didn't speak. The second time, he asked if he could keep the little camera Donovan had left on the kitchen table. The third time, he smiled. 6 months later, he moved in. On his first night, Mara tucked him into bed and stayed at the door longer than she meant to. "He's going to be okay," Donovan said, wrapping an arm around her from behind. "I know," she whispered, "because we are." They built their life slowly, layer by layer. The townhouse became a home filled with warmth and noise and mismatched furniture. Donovan took fewer projects, choosing quality over quantity. Mara expanded the center to include a youth mentorship program. Eli thrived quietly at first, then all at once. One afternoon, Mara found a photo in his backpack. He'd taken it during a field trip to the center, a shot of her laughing in the sunlight, unaware he'd been behind the lens. She looked at Donovan across the room. "He's got your eye." "No," he said, taking the photo from her hands. "He's got yours." Years passed and the center grew. So did their family. Not in numbers, but in depth. The kind of love that didn't fade, it matured, deepened, settled into something solid and unshakable. Donovan never returned to the man he was before her. He didn't want to. The cold, untouchable businessman had given way to someone better, someone vulnerable, open, and full of fire. He still wore tailored suits and drove expensive cars, but now he brought Eli to school in them and picked up groceries on the way home. Mara no longer felt like she was surviving. She was living boldly, unapologetically, and with her heart wide open. And on their 5th anniversary, they stood on the same rooftop where he had first asked her to spend forever with him. The city shimmered below, the air warm with spring. "You remember what you said that night?" she asked, fingers entwined with his. "Which part?" "That you weren't asking for easy, just real." He pulled her close, his forehead resting against hers. "And I got both." They didn't need a second proposal or another grand gesture. They'd already chosen each other every day, in every way that mattered. And in the quiet, under the stars and the city lights, they danced again. Still in love. Still together. Exactly where they were meant to be.